Hello and welcome to
Just one more watch.
Alright, enough of that. I do not want to be burnt at the stake for the sake of a watch review video. And it is a review of the Bulova Oceanographer, the reissue, aka the Devil Diver. So called because some wag back at Bulova in the early 1970s, when the original watch was released, decided that rather than print 660 feet as the water resistance rating on the dial, they would print 666 feet, the number of the beast, and the name Devil Diver rather stuck. Now perhaps some of you can help me with my addled memory today before I flip the camera and get into the top-down review part of the video. Citizen bought Bulova back in 2007 for just under $250 million. And I distinctly remember a rumour, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, that they were going to turn Bulova into a high accuracy, high frequency quartz only brand. They were going to kill off all remaining Bulova automatic models. I also distinctly remember a flood of dirt cheap Value 7750 powered automatic Bulova chronographs on eBay for less than about $400. And yet here we are, released in 2018, this automatic Devil Diver reissue. Did I get that wrong entirely, or did Bulova/Citizen just not want to miss out on the gravy train that is the retro dive watch reissue? Leave me a comment, let me know if you remember what I'm talking about. Now I have not just bought one of these for myself, this one is kindly on loan to the channel from my new best friend, Mr. P. Mr. P is a guy, I've done a few watch deals with him in the past, and he collected a watch from my house and said, look, by the way Jody, you're welcome to borrow any of my collection anytime you like, and it's fairly extensive. And I said, how many watches do you own, Mr. P? And he said, about 400. And I said, you and I are going to be friends. So he loaned me this Bulova. He also loaned me an Orient Retro reissue. You can expect to see a review of that one in a few weeks' time. But Devil Diver, I must say the name is more appropriate than you think, because the movement in this watch is a bit of a beast. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. I must admit, I like this Bulova Oceanographer rather a lot. I don't mind a retro reissue. I have reviewed plenty of them on the channel, and I have bought and sold plenty more besides. But this one, on paper, it's not really my cup of tea. There's a lot of polish, it's a little bit large, and there are certain elements of it that are more basic than the price would suggest. But as a package, it really works. I think it looks fantastic and it wears well. It looks like a Doxa, but it's priced like a Seiko. Now price, I'll show you what you get for your money, and then I'll talk about how much money I think you should be paying for one of these, because as usual there is a vast gulf between the RRP and what you can actually find them for. You don't even have to look that hard. So if I put up that picture of the original watch again and then cut to the reissue, it is identical to all intents and purposes. This is a very faithful reissue. The only major difference is the size, this one being 44, and I believe the original watch from the early 1970s was a 41. I also believe that back in 2018 when they launched this, they did a special edition 666 pieces in a smaller 41mm size, but the regular one, the one that you can buy today, the one that I have here, is a 44. So 44mm in diameter, 14.8mm thick, although a couple of those millimeters come from that box-domed sapphire crystal. 46, I measure actually at just under 46mm lug to lug. So one of the fabulous things about cushion case dive watches from this 70s era is they are almost as wide as they are long. Really compact lug to lug. That means it's going to wear far better than that 44mm suggests. 20mm lugs tapering down to 17.5, back up to 19.5 at the clasp. Sized up for me, 7-inch wrist. I could actually take one more of those links out. It's a little bit loose as it sits. 148 grams, so a big watch, 44mm, all stainless steel, 200-meter diver, but it doesn't tip the scales at over that 150-gram sweet spot. That is a piece of box-domed sapphire crystal, and a fabulous bit of sapphire it is. Apparently there is some anti-reflective undercoating in blue. Yeah, you can just about see a blue tinge in my studio lights, but this one a lot of flecto. I'll pop in some macro here. It looks fabulous outside today. One of the better watches, I think, when I take it outside onto my new bit of old burnt wood. It looks great, but you do get quite a bit of flexo from that crystal, as I will show you more of later on. 120 click unidirectional rotating bezel. Now I've heard various reports about what that bezel insert is made of. I choose to believe it is made of acrylic. So a slightly odd choice that they updated the crystal from acrylic to sapphire, but chose not to update that bezel insert. Anyway, it is very attractive, bezel action, really good, no backplay, no bounce at all. Now, I'm personally not normally a fan of high polish, and yet this watch is almost entirely high polish, and somehow the whole thing just works. So cushion case, it begins to undercut itself, so it fits nicely on the wrist. Vintage style Bulova logo there on that high polished sign crown. Really, the only element of this watch that is brushed is the mid-link of the bracelet. And the bracelet's really nice. I would say it is more like a president than anything else. But check that side profile, that is super comfortable on wrist, no sharp edges, not even any straight lines anywhere, so it wears very, very nicely. Just push pins in here, those are 5 links, so we've got a brushed middle link, and those outer edges have 2 links, a very small one and a larger one, all high polished. Now the end links are solid, I'll show you the case back in just a second or two. The mid link does protrude, so it is a kind of male mid link if you see what I mean, but it does angle down quite drastically from the off, meaning it wears beautifully. Now the clasp is a bit of a downer. It does have the Bulova logo etched in there, it does have a fold over, and it does have a, whoops, I've cut my nails today, a double security pusher, but it's a nasty old style press clasp, and that comes with a nasty old style press diver's extension. I mean, honestly, who thinks that we need a diver's extension on a retro reissue watch? This is the last thing that you'd be wrapping over a wetsuit and actually getting seriously wet at the weekends, surely. Nonetheless, it's there, 3 levels of micro adjust on the clasp as well. And that dial is a stunner. All credit to the person who designed it in the early 70s, no credit to the person who pressed start on the photocopier in 2018. It is lovely and it all just works. I guess you could argue that it is a sector dial. It's got that orange crosshair again, matching the second hand, and the 0 to 15 markers on the bezel insert. It's also got that outer orange rim, they kind of connect, yes, sort of a sector dial. The Bulova logo, again vintage style, is actually applied, more on that later. Oceanographer printed underneath in white, and automatic snorkel because it was the snorkel diver, and that infamous 666 feet. Date complication at the 3 with a frame, and that is an internal Cyclops. I've only seen that on one other watch. I saw it on a Tissot a couple of years ago. Very, very interesting effect here. I will hold the watch at an angle. It doesn't actually magnify the date all that much, but it is certainly a much neater effect than if the Cyclops was applied on the outside of the glass. That is far more normally the case. I believe this is another direct hark back to the watch of the 70s that had an acrylic crystal with an internal Cyclops on that one. And what about those hour markers? What about those indexes? I have not seen anything like them at all. If I put another little bit of macro in here, you can see they're held almost like diamonds. It's like a solitaire diamond in a kind of claw, as you would find on a ring. Very, very unusual, but rather effective, as you'll see from the Loom video later on. They certainly give the dial plenty of depth, and yet not something I've seen elsewhere. The handset are simple but really nicely done. Large fence post hour and minute hand in white, but they black out the center, which I always think is such a good look. Lollipop second hand in orange, again complementing the orange crosshairs and that orange bezel insert. Now the hands, if they seem slightly small for a 44mm watch, that's because the minute track is actually inboard of those large hour markers. Again, slightly unusual, haven't seen that layout before, but it works overall. And as I hinted, the loom is excellent. They don't specify what type it is, but it doesn't really matter if it works as well as this. I assume those little acrylic cylinders are kind of hollowed out and filled with a bit of loom, or there's a layer between the cylinders and the dial itself. Either way, it works. Plenty on the hour, the minute and the second hand also. Very good job on the loom, something you can't say with every retro reissue. I'm looking at you, Oris Diver 65. But what, I hear you ask, of this beastly movement? Well, it is lurking behind that stainless steel caseback. Very, very plain caseback. One of the plainest I've seen at the price, to be honest. They haven't tried to tart that one up in the slightest. Bit of a spec sheet, Bulova sapphire crystal dive watch, etc. Screw down crown, 200 meters of water resistance. Now, I gave you a big clue as to what movement is in here earlier on. Bulova are now owned by Citizen, so I'm guessing that you've already guessed that it is going to be a Miyota movement. I'll give you another clue. This one should give the game away. I'm going to unscrew the crown and I'm going to pull the crown out to the first position, then the second position, and the movement isn't going to hack. That can only mean one thing. Yes, this watch is indeed powered by a Miyota 8000 series. There it is in all its sort of glory, contained within a large plastic movement holder. Perhaps that's another reason why a 44mm dive watch only weighed in at 148 grams. I am not a big fan of the 8000 series. I rank them lower than the Seiko NH and 4R, really for one good reason. It's not the lack of hacking, I can cope with that. It's the unidirectional rotor winding, generally accompanied by a fair degree of noise and a fair degree of wobble. At least they've gone for a premium version. This is the 821D. You can tell it's premium because it has the skeletonized rotor and a fair degree of striping, a fair degree of decoration. They generally run a little bit smoother and a little bit quieter than the bog basic and dog rough 8215s. But why doesn't this watch have a Miyota 9000 series movement in it? If Citizen own Bulova, then surely Bulova has access to the cheapest Miyota 9000 series of anybody else. Not only would that have given this watch the lovely high beat sweep that you get from a 4Hz movement, but they're also generally far more accurate than the 8000s. Having said that, this one doesn't appear to be doing too badly for itself, does it? Coming in pretty much spot on with a good amplitude and a minimal beat error. But do bear in mind that the stated tolerances for these movements are minus 20 seconds to plus 40 seconds per day. So there is no guarantee that if you pick yourself up one of these Oceanographers, you're going to get results like that. Roughly 42-hour power reserve as well, 21 joules if you care. But enough about the beast in the back, let's get this little devil on wrist because it wears very, very well. I've got a 7-inch wrist for your reference. 44, normally outside of my comfort zone. I would normally shy away from watches this size, but no problems at all with this one. Cushion case divers really do vanish. And I like that President style bracelet as well. Plenty of flex, almost like a Jubilee in that sense. And I can cope with the lightweight, if slightly rattly, press clasp because that thing looks gorgeous. Yeah, and even though the hands aren't enormous, perhaps they belong more to a 40mm watch rather than a 44mm watch. Because they're white against that blue, they still have no problems with legibility. If you're not into blue and orange, there is a green and black version of this watch as well. Now, light play and flecto. You can see what I mean when I take the watch outside. I'm not convinced there's a massive amount of anti-reflective undercoating on that sapphire crystal, but I'm not convinced that I care either way. Lots of shiny surfaces, the acrylic bezel insert, all those high polished facets to the case and the bracelet, but it just works, it really does. And it's a similar story when you get it on wrist. You think it's going to be a nightmare, you think it's going to be blinding you with all those reflections, but it actually works as a whole. And that's the pocket shot. Clearly there's a strong 70s vibe happening here, and you're not going to be into this watch if you don't go for that look in general. But if you're okay with a cushion case diver, this thing wears nicer than the Turtle. Believe me, I had a King Turtle through the channel a couple of weeks ago and I ended up selling it on because it was too big and too heavy for me. This one on paper, the diameter dimension is bigger, but it wears so much better. So looks and feels like a Doxa, priced like a Seiko, but wears better than a Seiko? How much for all of this goodness then? Well, Bulova want to charge you $795, that's the MSRP, but then when Bulova themselves are offering you 20% off, you know you're not paying MSRP nor nothing like it for this one. Check out the Joma shop price, $400, half of the retail. That I think is perfectly reasonable, even given a couple of shortcomings in the slightly substandard movement and the cheapo clasp. But apart from those two things, I've only really got one other complaint today. And it's that applied logo. Nice of them to do an applied logo, nice of them to do it in the old font, but look at it. It looks pretty terrible. It looks like somebody's gone for a bit of back alley dentistry for some new braces and they've just wired them up any which way as possible. Surely they could have done a better job than that. So I wouldn't say an opportunity missed here by Bulova. It's still a fantastic watch. I think it looks great, it wears fabulously, and if you can pick one up for $400, it offers great value for money as well for a big brand watch with sapphire that looks this good. Almost fabulous though, almost one of the best $500 divers you can buy. Imagine that with a 9000, a decent clasp and just a few tweaks to neaten it all up. It would have been amazing. As it is, it's still one of the best retro reissues that I've seen. So there you have it, the Bulova Oceanographer Devil Diver retro reissue. Definitely one of the better retro reissues that I've reviewed on the channel over the last couple of years. And let's be honest, I've reviewed quite a few of them. It really is a bit of a gravy train for manufacturers these days. If you like the old look but in a large modern size case shape that is super comfortable and super wearable, this one could be right up your street. But there are a couple of obvious cost saving exercises here. The clasp, I guess they get away with a clasp because it's a 70s reissue, but the movement, 8000 series, Citizen Bulova, that is cheap. Why did you not put a 9000 series in this, especially considering the price that you're charging for it? Having said that, if you can find one at a good price, it disguises its cheapness quite well. Thanks for watching. Thanks again to Mr. P. I will see you in a future video.